Hey, everybody. Welcome to Third Tuesday Conversation. I'm Danica Olson, and I will be your host. We're glad to be together today with Jacob Sorenson, or Jake, as he says is his youth ministry name. Uh, we're going to be talking about his research with camp ministry, the study called Effective Camp Research Project. Hey, Jacob, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Awesome. Just if you're listening in for the first time or if it's been a while, just want to remind you that this will have a portion later where you can join in the conversation. So at any time, feel free to enter your questions into the dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen labeled questions, and we'll pass them along a little later. We also would love it if you'd live tweet using the hashtag 3TC. So there's our housekeeping. Jacob, before we get talking about your camp research, I'd love if you'd tell us a bit about who you are and what you're up to when you're not hanging out at camps.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's great to be here. What do I do when I'm not hanging out at camp? Well, I hang out at church. My wife's a pastor. She's a Lutheran pastor. I live in rural Wisconsin, just north of La Crosse. Two boys. Elijah is 12. And really close to being a teenager and acting like it. And then Nathaniel's 9, and so we have lots of adventures together. We just got back from Disney and had that whole experience.
Uh-huh.
Did Harry Potter World at Universal, so that was a lot of fun. So I get to spend time with my family when I'm not hanging out at camp. And I like to run, I like to garden, all sorts of stuff.
Cool.
So, and still involved in some youth ministry things, both in the church and teaching some courses here and there. So, yeah, I get to do all sorts of stuff.
Very good. Well, we're super excited to have you here talking about this longitudinal study that you've been a part of. And so tell us a bit about how you got interested in the project, about the whole process and what you've learned.
Yeah, sure. So I worked at camp as when I was in college. I went to Wartburg College and worked at camp while I was there. Went around the country, worked at like 3 different camps, and had a great time. And received my call to ministry when I was at camp. Ended up going to seminary. Was in youth ministry out near Philadelphia for a few years, and then got back into camp ministry as a program director in Southwest Wisconsin. And while I was there, I was asking some of these questions about, hey, there's all these great studies and books about youth ministry. Where's the stuff about camp? Because oftentimes when I saw camp mentioned in the youth ministry literature, it was kind of an aside, or looking at camp as just fun and games, or, you know, it's theologically shallow. Now let's talk about something that's theologically deep. And so I was a little concerned about that, and I was asking these questions, and somebody finally said, hey, if you want there to be camp research, you got to go and do it. And so I ended up going to Luther Seminary and focusing my doctoral work on camp research. And this is one of the projects that came out of that. And so I've been partnering with Paul Hill to do this project. And this is one of several projects I've been working on, looking at camping ministry and its relation to other ministries of the church. Another one is the Confirmation Project. Some of you might have heard of that. It's 5 different denominations involved in that. And I got to visit camps as part of that and look at camps as Christian educational experiences. So really exciting stuff. Kind of finally scratching the surface of what's really going on at camp, because, you know, when we think about camp, we think about our own experiences, and so what we have is anecdotal evidence, right? So I had a great camp experience. Well, that means maybe that everybody who goes to camp is going to have this amazing life-changing experience like me, right? Well, that's not exactly the case. We know that some kids have a terrible time at camp, and some have a mediocre time, and some, you know, it changes their life. So what's behind that? And that's really what we're trying to get at with some of these different research projects. And so the Effective Camp Project started again as a conversation with Paul Hill, and Raleigh Martinson was involved, and we got a little bit of grant money and started looking at camps in Wisconsin, and we looked at 6 Lutheran camps in Wisconsin. They were Lake Wapo, Sugar Creek, Lutherdale, Imago Dei Village, Luther Park in Chautauqua, and then Luther Point in Grantsburg. So we had to focus on Wisconsin because that was the limitations of the grant.
Okay.
But we started with some we started with some focus groups with camp participants, and so we talked to the campers, we talked to the summer staff, we talked to visiting pastors and youth workers, and so we did 15 of these focus groups at different camps around the state. And then we surveyed parents. After the kids got home, we sent out this survey to the parents like 2 to 3 weeks after camp, and we had almost 400 responses to that.
Wow.
And then we kind of, so from these initial data, we came up with these 5 fundamental characteristics of camp that we'll be talking about. These things that the participants and the counselors themselves and the youth ministers, it came out of these conversations that these 5 things were essential to the camp experience. In order for it to be called camp, it had to have these 5 fundamental characteristics. And then what we did was we went back this past summer to the 6 camps and we surveyed the campers. We did it at the beginning of camp, so the first day of camp. We surveyed them again on the last day of camp to see if there was any growth during the camp experience, and then we sent a follow-up survey 2 to 3 months after camp. And that's kind of the longitudinal part that you were talking about, to see if any of these things that happened during camp, do any of them last, you know, more than a few days after camp? And so that's really what we were going after in this study. So really exciting stuff. A lot of it's on that website that you see there, so you can go there for more info. But yeah, we can chat more about this, the findings. And the major finding, I mean, is that there was a positive and ongoing impact. And this was clear across all the data sets. The campers saw it, the summer staff members saw it, the parents identified it, the directors, the pastors identified these ongoing impacts, and they're recognizable, things that we can identify, things that we can measure. And they didn't just impact the campers, the participants, but these impacts actually extended to their supporting networks, specifically their families. So the parents would talk about things like, my kid wants to pray around the dinner table. They want to read Bible together in the evening. My child is being nicer to his or her siblings. You know, things that extended to the families, but also to the churches, in that young people trying to get more involved in their churches and pastors identifying this and so forth. So this finding that the impacts didn't just affect the campers but extended to the supporting networks. Major finding of this study. You know, and some of these things we kind of know intuitively. Those of us who have been at camp are like, well, no, duh. But what's really interesting about this is that there are those folks in ministry that are skeptical about camp's influence and impact, and its significance in faith formation. And they say, well, you know, great, you have one camp story, but that doesn't really convince me that camp has some sort of lasting impact. And so actually seeing these things through a study is really valuable. And so these impacts that we saw centered on what we call the 5 fundamental characteristics of the camp model. And these 5 fundamental characteristics, you can kind of envision them in this picture here as overlapping concepts. It's not like a hierarchy, like one is more important than the other. They all have to be there, and if they're not all there, then the camp experience itself breaks down. So if camp as a safe space breaks down, then the camp experience breaks down for that young person. And we saw that in a few of the instances, and we'll talk about how rare that is in the camp experience, but also that these 5 need to be present. And so in no particular order here, I mean, camp has to be relational. They build relationships with each other, with the summer staff members who are there, with a lot of times these are intergenerational relationships with either family camp or with the college-age young people and the elementary or middle or high school young people that are there, and they live together for the week. They eat together, pray together, play together, work together, worship together. They have to work through their differences, and so it's not all just like, let's ignore the difficult stuff in our lives. It's let's work through them. And when we get upset with one another, what does it mean to practice forgiveness? And so it's not just that it's relational, it's an intentional Christian community, and that's where the faith-centered piece comes in. I've heard some critiques about camp that it's a little siloed, like maybe there's the worship experience or there's a Bible study, but then now we're going to go off and have some fun. The camps that we looked at and the camp model that we're talking about has faith incorporated into all aspects of the camp experience. In fact, beyond this project, I did a survey of camps throughout the country in 4 different denominations, including the ELCA, Episcopalians, United Methodists, and Presbyterians. And it was over 300 camps that responded. and it was 92% of these camps said that it's a priority that faith is incorporated into all aspects of the camp experience.
That's
And so
great.
we can really see that this is a priority of these Christian camps, and this is fundamental. It's faith-centered. It's not just, okay, now we're going to go do a Christ hike, now let's have some fun. It's while we're having fun, while we're doing these activities, we're actually learning about God. We're
Yeah.
actually growing in our faith. And so faith is brought into everything that's happening in the camp experience.
Awesome.
Camp is different from home. It's away from home, and that's an essential piece of camp.
Hmm.
I talk about this sometimes in a sense of unplugging. Unplugging both literally, that is,
Hmm.
we don't have all of our electronic gadgets with us, specifically cell phones and the internet. We're away from some of that stuff. But it's also unplugging from the home environment itself. And so that I have, as a participant, a different experience, an experience separate from the expectations that I might
Hmm.
have in the home environment or in the school environment. And so I might have a nickname or be made fun of or whatever it is in the school environment. And at camp, I have a sense of I can reinvent myself. Who am I really? Do
Hmm.
I really believe this faith stuff, for instance? And what does it mean for me to be independent? And so this being away from home, this difference from home, this unplugging from the home environment is an essential piece of camp.
Yeah.
Camp is participatory. It's experiential. It focuses on kinesthetic learning, the sounds and the smells and the sights and the touch. Um, we engage all the senses in the camp environment. Um, Incredibly participatory, and this again has to do with the outdoor environment of camp.
Yeah.
Uh, Outdoors may be related to different from home, but it also is related to this participatory nature, that we're embedded in this new highly kinesthetic environment that we're trying to figure out, and all of our senses are highly attuned. We've got this sort of hyper-awareness of what's going on around us. And we're not just learning about the faith, right? We're actually doing it. We're
Hmm.
getting our hands dirty. Um, I think about it in terms of going to church, and there's statues and there's icons or there's stained glass window, and we're not, we kind of see those things from a distance. At camp, we take them off the shelf and we mess with them and we
Yeah.
rub our faces in them, and we figure this stuff out. It's highly participatory, highly experiential. And this idea of safe space. And safety at camp um, is identified as the #1 priority for the camp directors, which makes a lot of sense, right?
I hope
These
so.
young people are being entrusted. Right, exactly. These young people are being entrusted to the camp directors, and so they take that experience, they take that responsibility very seriously. But it's not just physical safety that we're talking about.
Hmm.
Um, we're talking about emotional and spiritual safety. And so when the young people talked about camp as a safe space, they were talking about it more as it's safe to be myself.
Yeah.
It's safe to express my beliefs. I feel like I can be a Christian here without judgment. I feel like I can be myself here without being judged. Um, so all of these 5 fundamental characteristics are interacting together to give rise to what we call the camp experience. Um, and so we really get a sense of what camp is when we look at these 5 fundamental characteristics. So that's that in brief. And
Awesome.
if we go on to kind of the next slide, so I just want to fly through some of this stuff. Um, these are some of the things from the surveys that we had. You can see from the parents, from the campers. You see that 97%? We find that again and again. It's the parents, the campers, but also the camp directors that talk about camp as a place of fun. And so when we talk to people that come out of the camp experience, we see 97% over and over again. I had a good time. I had fun. It was a positive experience, 97%, which is, of course, an overwhelming number that we think of. So yes, it's true that there are some people that do not have a positive experience,
Hmm.
and yet the vast majority do have this positive experience. Now, what about the 3%? Because we want to be concerned about the 3% as well.
Hmm.
And we can identify in some of these young people who had a poor experience at camp a breakdown in one of the 5 fundamental characteristics. And the 2 that are most common that lead to a poor experience are a breakdown in safety. I didn't feel like I could be myself. I felt like I had to hide my true self, or I was made fun of, maybe, bullied. And then the relational one. I didn't feel like I made friends, or I didn't make real connections.
Yeah.
And so when we see a breakdown in some of these characteristics, we see a breakdown in the camp experience itself. But you can see the numbers as far as growing in faith, growing in self-confidence, learning more about God. Parents and campers are identifying these things. Now, here's the deal. We know these things, right? I mean, because end of camp surveys are always 90-something%. Oh yeah, I had a great time. Oh, it was amazing. So the question that we're really trying to look at is, does any of it last?
Mm-hmm.
Because we hear these things about a camp high, right, that quickly fades, or we hear these things about it being theologically shallow or not really lasting. So what can we identify from these surveys that we have? Well, when we look at it long term, and that is several months after the camp experience, they've had a chance to reintegrate into their home environment. They've had a chance to attend church some more. They've had a chance to get back into school. We can identify some of the pieces of what we might consider a camp high.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just 4 of the things that we can identify. Increased excitement about worship in the camp experience. And so they go into camp and we ask them on the first day, do you agree or disagree that worship services are usually boring? And they tend to agree. Well, on the last day of camp, they tend to disagree with that. And so their interest in worship and their feeling that they're involved in worship increases during camp. And then 2 or 3 months after camp, we can see that it goes back to pre-camp levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an increased excitement about worship during camp that appears to fade. And we can probably identify some of the causes of this. They're going back to their home environment, right? They're going back to church. It's not as participatory, maybe. And that fits in with this participatory learning that I learn a lot through games and activities. They get a stronger sense of this at camp, and after it goes back to pre-camp levels. This increased positivity, they feel very positive about their life overall at the end of the camp experience, and that tends to regress to pre-camp levels. And then this idea of vertical faith. And so Thomas Groom talks about vertical faith versus horizontal faith. Vertical faith is kind of the I believe in God and God created the world, and identification with some of the faith tenets. The doctrine, maybe the theology. We could look at this as more cerebral sort of faith, and so these sorts of things go up during the camp experience, and then they seem to regress back to pre-camp levels. And so we can say, yes, we can identify a sort of camp high even when it comes to faith. But if we go to the next slide, we can look at the lasting things. So we looked at 17 identical questions. Pre-camp, post-camp, and then in the follow-up.
Okay.
16 of these showed growth during camp.
Mm-hmm.
Out of those 16 that showed growth, 6 of them regressed, and 10 of them stayed high 2 to 3 months after camp. And we can cluster them like this. Devotional practices. Young people are participating in devotional practices much more after camp than they were in the 2 to 3 months prior to camp. These include things like reading the Bible, praying by themselves and praying with other people, and conversations with their family about God. We ask specific questions about conversations with family about faith, and those who had a very low-level pre-camp, many of them showed high levels of conversation with their family about faith in the 2 to 3 months after camp. And so we can see these devotional practices, these conversations about faith leaking into the home environment and into personal practices following camp. That's a big finding. Yeah. This idea of horizontal faith, as opposed to vertical faith, horizontal faith. What does faith mean for me in my life? And so this was concepts like faith matters to me. Faith is important and it makes a difference in my everyday life. It's important for me to be involved in a Christian community. These sorts of things grew during camp and remained high after camp. And these are the things when we think about it that we're more concerned about when we talk about young people. We know that things like belief in God, God created the world, belief in different tenets of faith are going to go up and down. Faith and doubt, right? Faith and doubt. Mm-hmm. We talk about these things all the time in youth ministry, that doubt is an essential part of faith. The things that we want to stick long term are the ideas that faith matters in my life, that I can turn to somebody, a faith mentor, when I need to, and these are the things that are lasting after the camp experience. We see an increase in self-confidence that continues, and importantly for us as youth ministry folks, as pastors, increased engagement in church and in congregational ministries, saying that yes, it's important for me to be involved, saying I plan to be involved when I become an adult,
Mhm.
um, and actual attendance at church in the months following camp. And interestingly, this corroborates a finding that we see in the National Study of Youth and Religion data set. I did some work on this, and we can see that those who attended camp as teenagers 5 years later are much more likely to participate in communal religious practices
Huh.
than their peers who did not attend camp. 5 years after the camp experience. That's a pretty incredible finding, and so the
Right.
effective camp stuff corroborates that. Um, so these are all really exciting things that we found from the study. There's so much more in here, and I could talk for days and hours about this, obviously. But uh, I'd love to hear what questions people have about this. Obviously, you can go to effectivecamp.com and see more. You can email me and find out more. But what are some of the questions that are going on in people's heads now?
Yeah. Well, as you and I talked yesterday, seems that summers are becoming more and more full, and lots of different disciplines are on to the camp thing. So there's, I don't know, underwater basket weaving camp and hockey camp and basketball camp and camp,
Right.
camp, 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 camp. So one thing that I know that gets talked about in our circles is how do you get kids excited to go to camp, or maybe more importantly, um, how do you help to convince parents and maybe even pastoral staff to get behind camp, that it's an experience that, like you found in this research, that is
Yeah.
lasting and important to kids' as both spiritual development, but just as their personal development as a whole.
Right. This is a great question, and it really is a long-term thing as far as camp marketing and trying to convince people over and over again. We get people that are excited about camp and believers in camp, and then they cycle through, and then we have another group of kids come up and maybe
Mm.
haven't had the camp experience. But having those mentors, having those people that have had positive experiences, share those positive experiences can be incredibly powerful. And so parents that have seen the changes in their young people,
Mm.
have them talk to other parents, have them present about it. These findings are incredibly powerful, I believe, to put before parents and to put before senior pastors, for sure, to
Mhm.
say, look, we can see some of the great details about camp and these fundamental characteristics, but also that the camp experience has some incredibly lasting and very positive impacts.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but nothing is going to beat those personal stories
Yeah.
of people having positive experiences. So you can say, here are the data. Here are the data from a reputable study or two. Now, let's hear from somebody in our congregation who had an experience, and let's hear about what it looks like for real people. Nothing's going to trump these stories for us, but including some of these data points alongside the stories, I think can be incredibly powerful in promoting the camp experience. Um, and to understand that we shouldn't get totally discouraged if we see that somebody didn't have a positive experience, because we know that that happens. Um, so rather than say, oh, there was a poor experience, so we're never going back to camp again,
Mhm.
we can say that was one of the 3%. Now, how can we improve these things for the future? How can I help make my camp better? Um, I think that that's a more positive thing to do than to say, oh, we're not going to do this anymore.
Yeah. Well, that was a great segue into a question we've got coming in. How do I help improve my camp?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is this is a difficulty for a lot of us in youth ministry because a lot of us have personal camp experiences, and so whether we attended camp as a camper or for a lot of us worked on summer staff,
Hmm.
we have a specific idea of how camp is supposed to be done.
Yep.
This is how camp is awesome, and it has to do with my experience. And if all other camps could be like the camp that I worked at or I went to as a kid, then camp would be great. But they're not. And so we've got this phenomenon of youth ministry folks driving past 3 or 4 camps to get to the camp that they know and love.
Yep.
Because that's the only one that does it right. Okay,
Uh-huh.
yeah, this camp model's great in my camp, but these other camps just don't do it right.
Yep.
One of the great things about this study and these findings, the camp model is incredibly adaptive. It's not limited to one time or one space.
Hmm.
It can be adapted in many different environments. And so we went to a camp like Wapo, which has 400 campers in a space of about 25 acres. And I mean, if you do the math, it's got a population density of about Washington, D.C. I mean, it's a totally different experience than something like Sugar Creek that has a square mile of territory and has 100, 150 campers there, right? It's a totally different sort of experience when you're there, and yet we can see in both of these environments that the camp model is functioning, and the 5 fundamental characteristics are there. And so first, I would say let's try to suspend our prejudice about camp and what camp is, and try to expand our understanding of where the camp model can be present and try to understand what's going on. And then we can say, well, the camp model is breaking down in this place in this way. And how can we help improve camp? We can get involved.
Yeah.
We can get involved. Get involved, talk to the board members, talk to the director. If the director won't talk with you, then we got an issue. And then you can talk to somebody like me or someone like Paul Hill or somebody else who can get in touch with these folks and say, hey, you're not listening to your constituents. We'd like to help you become a better camp.
Yeah.
And so I would be very surprised if you as a youth minister or a pastor approached your camp director and said, hey, I've got some real concerns that I'd like to talk with you about. I would be very surprised if that person didn't sit down and listen.
Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. We will take a couple more questions. Maybe we only have time for one more after this particular one. But Neil is wondering, what are you doing with the research with the camps that were not involved in the study? I assume that means nationally, or how
Right.
are you expanding the study, or are there plans to expand the study?
There are plans to expand the study. Funding is always an issue with something like this, but we have hopes and plans to look at a few more camps this coming summer, but also to expand it beyond the Midwest. And so we're asking camps that are interested in being involved to contact us and to see if we can try to expand the data set, but also to look at specific camps because, again, every camp is different and they have different specifics of programs and ministries going on. And so we can look at how is the camp model functioning in this particular time and space? How can we improve this particular camp? And what are some of the particular strengths of this camp? And so that can help us improve the ministries on the ground, but also help us identify some other great practices that camps are doing.
Awesome. Well, we've unfortunately come but up to the end of our time together. Let me just read what's coming in here. This is a follow-up question. How might the study expand and wonder about how camp connects to the home congregation and the home? That's a great.
Yes, I would love to do a more integrated study looking at some of the experiences of pastors and youth ministers and looking specifically at congregations and saying, following the young people in the congregational setting and then to camp and then back to the congregation. I would love to do something like that. So there are a lot of places to go with this. This was really a foundational study in a lot of ways, and something that we're hoping to build from. So we started with the summer camp experience, and we started with kind of a specific age group of 11 to 14-year-olds. I would love to expand it to high schoolers. I would love to expand it to adventure camp experiences. Love to expand it to summer staff members and find out about the summer staff experience and how that impacts folks. Family camp. There are so many possibilities and places to go with this study. We started with what we thought was one of the most basic aspects of camp, and that's the one-week camp experience.
Yeah.
Kind of the the core middle school, or at least 5th through 9th grade sort of age group,
Mhm.
and we really do hope to expand it from there.
Yeah, I think it'd be fabulous as a coaching tool for helping to train up the staff to say these are the things that last and have impact. But I mean, gosh, the it would be very far-reaching if you could find some cool ways to expand it. Congregations could learn a lot in the way that they also do ministry in this changing culture and world where we don't have the frequency that we once did with our kids, that maybe the more concentrated experience-based things are where we're headed, where it's at. So
Yeah. Yeah,
cool.
that's totally. And to actually see the numbers and to say, yes, we can see the long-term impacts.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a certain sort of camp high, but we can see these incredible long-term impacts that are impacting churches, congregations, families. This is something to get on board with.
Right.
This is something to increase our partnerships with camps,
Right.
not to pull back from them.
Exactly. Exactly. Cool. Well, Jake, thanks so much for sharing your passion about this and being involved in the study. We'll look forward to hearing more from you as your research continues. And as you mentioned before, people can check out the Effective Camp website or email you directly, or even there's your Twitter handle. So thanks for all the access points. We're glad that you were with us today, so thanks so much. Just a few housekeeping things. Third Tuesday conversations are the list is growing and growing. So if you like what you've heard or you are interested in a different topic than camp, there are over 60, I think, titles now that are archived on the Third Tuesday Conversation website. So check that out. And next month, we're going to have Amanda Berger with us, and she's going to talk about her ministry with Soul Sisterhood and the practice of Bible journaling. So we look forward to being together in March once again, and we hope that you have a fantastic day. Thanks so much, everybody.